Welcome back to the most popular true crime series about the Long Island serial killer. I'm the host, and today, we're going to enter the case with an unprecedented climax, where all the mysteries are finally revealed, and will justice really be served? If you think you're ready, beware, because the Long Island night has never been quieter. On a gloomy morning, the Long Island sea is cold. The police team discovers the final evidence in the shocking case. Digital data fragments, physical evidence left at the scene, and especially the victims that the public thought had been forgotten. The investigation team's hearts are pounding because they know this is the moment to face the killer directly, the last time he will have to answer for all his crimes. He, the man whose every move, every message, every trace has been tracked by the online community and forensic experts for months, is standing right in front of them. His gaze is cold. But there is one thing that cannot be hidden: the mental turmoil as all the evidence piles up on him. And now the whole story reaches its climax. If you thought the previous parts were haunting, prepare yourself, because the final climax is coming and no one can take their eyes off it. Welcome back to the most popular true crime series about the Long Island serial killer. If you thought you were ready for the previous parts, beware, because today we enter the final climax of the case, where all the mysteries are exposed, and justice will face its greatest challenge. I am the host, and today, I invite you to join me in the cold waves of Long Island, where peace is just a thin layer of ice to hide the horror of crime. That morning, a thick fog blanketed Gilgo Beach. The waves lapped against the shore with a steady rhythm. But for the police investigators, the sound was no longer relaxing. Each wave seemed to be a heartbeat, a reminder that what they were about to witness would change everything. The bodies that had been found years earlier were just the tip of the iceberg, and today, the remaining evidence would lead them to the killer, or at least a crucial part of the answer that the forensics community and true crime fans have been chasing for years. The investigators stood on the beach, their clothes smeared, but not with mud or sand, but with a series of digital and physical clues that had been discovered from previous reports. The team faced not only a gruesome scene, but also every digital detail the killer had left behind. Computers, hard drives, phones, every little thing could hold the key to solving the case. And while the investigators were seriously working, some couldn't help but smile. Who would have thought we'd have to wear Batman-style armor to investigate in real life today? That joke helped ease the tension somewhat. But no one in the group forgot that every moment was golden to find the killer. Before we delve into the scene, let's recall some important details about the case. The Long Island serial killer, also known as the Gilgo Beach killer, has been rocking the community for years, with a series of cases involving female prostitutes, victims who often operated online, and whose traces mysteriously disappeared. Bodies were found scattered along the Long Island coastline, hidden in the mangroves, sometimes just body parts or personal items. And despite the many leads, the killer had remained at large, until today, when all the digital, crime scene, and oral evidence had been compiled, and the investigation team believed it was time to confront him. The officers walked step by step, eyes scanning every patch of sand, every bush. They knew that even a small footprint or a piece of discarded cloth could lead them to the killer. Cameras and recording devices were placed everywhere to capture every action and reaction, and while some members muttered jokes like, "If he studied psychology, we must be the best in our class," no one could deny the tension in the air. As the team pushed deeper into the mangrove area near the sea, they discovered an old, tattered backpack with a faded label, a clue they had been searching for. In the backpacks, there were some documents, phones, and some personal items that the victims had owned. Immediately, forensic and technology experts were called in to recover data, scan fingerprints, and analyze DNA. The atmosphere became thick with tension. Every action was carefully calculated. A young police officer smiled wryly. "I thought I came here just to see the sea, but I also had to play the role of a detective like in the movies." But no one dared to let the smile lingers. When they open the old phone, they find that the data has been erased, but there are still traces that can be recovered. Text messages, missed calls, bookmarked locations. all of it paints a picture full of clues. The investigators analyze every detail, every file, looking for a direct link to the killer, or at least to deduce his behavior and psychological patterns. And this is where the story reaches its climax. They know that even a small detail missed could drag the case on for years. While the cops get to work, I want to remind you that not all true crime stories are dull or tragic. Interspersed with the tension are moments of humor, helping viewers take a breath and keep watching. For example, when an investigator falls off a sandboard, his colleague shouts, "He must have just left us a footprint," a joke that underscores the brutality and absurdity of the scene. But as they look out at the foggy Long Island beach, the laughter is gone. They see an abandoned area where the first signs of the victims were discovered years ago, and now, the last bits of evidence seem to indicate that the killer is still very close, perhaps even watching them. Every step is accompanied by a ripple in the sand, and the team senses that a psychological battle is taking place between them and the killer, where any mistake could lead to failure. Just as everyone is scouring the area, one of the team calls out, "Hey guys, look, the trace just appeared on the phone." And when they gather, the screen displays a string of text messages that only the killer would know, suggesting that he's watching the team's every move. The atmosphere was tense, but there were also some humorous comments like, "If he sends more emojis, we'll have to form an emoji team to decode them." Here, we should also mention the psychological nature of the killer. He was an extremely calculating person, always hiding in the darkness of online platforms, but leaving behind sophisticated enough traces to make forensic experts admire. Pieces of paper, hard drives, phones, all like an advanced chess game. The investigation team was participating. And as a humorous but reasonable saying goes, he's the type of person who likes to play Sudoku with other people's lives. The deeper the investigation team got into the crime scene, the more they realized the sophistication of the criminal acts, from the way the body was hidden to the way the online data was manipulated. They collected evidence, scanned fingerprints, recovered data, and at the same time noted every little detail. Every detail could be the final piece to solving the case. As they paused for a break, everyone looked at each other, eyes tense but filled with determination. And then, at that moment, a shocking discovery emerged. A previously unpublished piece of evidence that could directly connect the previous victims to the killer. Immediately, the investigation team called the forensic experts, and everyone realized a major step toward bringing the killer to light was right before their eyes. These scenes, the sound of the waves, the enveloping fog, and every digital detail restored, created a complete picture of the scene, where the killer once believed he could not be detected, now stood on the brink of being exposed. Every moment that passed was a step closer to the final confrontation, where justice would be tested and the years-long mystery would be solved. We'll leave it at that, but don't let it go for too long, because Chapter 2 will take you deep into the killer's mysterious web, where online manipulation, potential accomplices, and sophisticated behavior will be exposed. And trust me, you want to keep watching every step of the way, because the Long Island serial killer is more than just a name. It's a nightmare. Welcome back to the next installment of the Long Island serial killer saga. Will justice be served? If you thought that all the mysteries were revealed in Chapter 1, well, sorry, you're wrong. Because the web of mystery we're about to explore extends far beyond the shores of the sea, into the virtual world, where every click, every message, every online profile could be a link to the killer. I'm the host, and today, prepare yourself for some intense online scavenger hunts interspersed with hilarious moments that are sure to give you goosebumps and a little chuckle. Once the investigation team discovered the crucial evidence on the beach, the next step was to explore the digital data left behind by the killer. In the digital age, criminals like the Long Island serial killer not only operate in real life, but also leave traces on the internet, from social networks, text messages, to dating platforms and private forums. The investigation team knew that if they relied only on the physical scene, they would lose an important part of the whole picture, and it was the online data that could reveal the killer's psychology, strategy, and even identity. In the investigation room, digital forensics experts were recovering data from old phones, computers, hard drives, and storage devices. Every data file, Every deleted email, even disabled images, were recovered using sophisticated software. Watching the experts work, a team member sighed. It's like playing treasure hunt in the digital jungle, but the treasure is full of crime. The joke lightened the mood, but everyone understood the danger behind every byte of data. In the early hours, the team discovered a string of deleted but recoverable messages from previous victims. These messages suggested that the killer had reached out to his victims online, manipulating, luring, or communicating in ways only the person involved could understand. Investigators called this the online mystery network, a place where the physical clues on the beach were just the tip of the iceberg, while the hidden clues lay in chats, emails, and online profiles. The recovered messages revealed that the killer often used multiple anonymous accounts, impersonating different characters. He messaged his victims, building false trust, and then gradually led them into dangerous situations. The team analyzed every language pattern, every word choice, every spelling mistake, to identify psychological habits and signatures of him. One member joked, if he had ever taken a writing class, he would have been top of the class, but the topic was a little off. As they dug deeper, they discovered a series of duplicate social media accounts, created by the killer to track, interact with, and direct his victims. This was the turning point. If the team could link these accounts to the physical crime scene, they would find a direct link between the killer and the victims, paving the way for a more intense confrontation later. While the digital experts worked, traditional investigators probed the victims' social environments, studying their relationships, online habits, and schedules. They discovered that many of the victims had been lured into arranged online meetings, and that these meetings were often located near Long Island, where he could easily hide his crimes without being detected. Honestly, one investigator said with a sneer, if he had just used Tinder or Bumble, we would probably have a few sad online romances right now, not this horrific murder. But the fun was just a cover, as the grim reality set in. A key online profile revealed that the killer had interacted with his victims through forums and private groups, where members exchanged sensitive information. Cyber analysts determined that he had tracked his victims' habits, anticipated their movements, and meticulously planned his crimes. It was then that the team discovered a shocking clue. Several of the victims had shared photos and locations online, and all of this data was accessed from a single IP address, a digital trail that investigators believed could lead directly to the killer. They began tracking this IP address, combined with physical data collected from a beach, and found that his activities extended beyond Long Island to several neighboring areas, widening the scope of their investigation and making them work harder. Throughout the process these days, there are still funny moments that help keep viewers engaged. For example, when a network analyst discovers that the killer liked a cat video on YouTube while planning the crime, his colleague laughs. Oh, so he likes cats, but cats can't save the lives of his victims. This sentence just makes. Everyone was relieved, while emphasizing the absurdity of the killer's psychology. Next, the investigation team expanded the hunt online, tracing the killer's activities on dating and social media platforms. They discovered that he often created fake accounts, chatted, and slowly established trust with his victims, making them vulnerable to manipulation. Psychological analysis showed that he was highly intelligent, but also extremely vicious, using his understanding of the internet to conceal all his crimes. Importantly, these findings helped the investigation team identify a behavioral pattern, suggesting that the killer was not just acting on impulse, but also had a well-planned strategy, linking victims in cycles and locations, thereby keeping them under control. One investigator exclaimed, if he played chess, no one could beat him unless we became living supercomputers. As the team continued to track down the data, they found several messages from former victims, warning that they felt they were being stalked, but did not yet know who the perpetrator was. These messages provided another important clue. The attacker was not only physically attacking, but also creating fear online, making the victims feel isolated and easily controlled. With all these clues, the team began to map out a strategy to find the killer, combining physical data from the beach with online data, building a relationship map between victims, locations, and his online behavior. This was an important step in preparing for the final confrontation, where all the mysteries would be solved. Throughout the investigation, the digital forensics team and traditional investigators also faced some funny and sad situations. For example, when they traced an IP address, they found it in a small cafe where an old man was sipping coffee and reading the newspaper, completely unaware that his tracks were linked to a gruesome murder. He probably doesn't know that he's the main character in a true crime movie today, one member exclaimed. But the funny moments did not diminish the tension and seriousness of the case. When an investigation team began to compare online data with the actual crime scene, they realized that some of the victims had been stalked long before they had even met the killer in person, and that he had planned it extremely meticulously. Psychological analysts concluded that he was not only a murderer, but also a sophisticated manipulator who knew how to exploit every weakness of the victim, from psychology to online habits. With all this data, the investigation team eventually built a detailed profile of the killer's online behavior and habits, including how he created fake accounts, how he lured his victims, the places he frequented, and even the personal details he accidentally revealed. All of these details are important pieces of the puzzle to prepare for the final confrontation, where all the mysteries will be revealed. Before the end of Chapter 2, the investigation team holds an important meeting. They compare every clue, every online and physical data, and realize that the killer is closer than ever to being exposed. One investigator looks at the computer screen, sighs, but his eyes light up. We found the entrance to his network. Now it's time to prepare for the next step, a face-to-face confrontation, and this time, he won't be able to escape. And here, we stop, but the climax is not over yet. Chapter 3 takes you into the ultimate confrontation, where the killer is confronted with living victims, digital data, and physical. Welcome back. If you thought all the mysteries were revealed, well, forget it, because Chapter 3 will bring us face-to-face with the killer, where the online network we just explored in Chapter 2 will collide with the real scene, and all the pieces will begin to fit together into a horrifying panorama, both tense and funny, because the absurdity of the killer's behavior sometimes makes us laugh a little while getting goosebumps. Early in the morning, the investigation team gathered at the Long Island Police Headquarters, where the conference room had been transformed into a special command center. Round tables were filled with files, laptops were opened, and screens showed crime scene maps, IP addresses, social media accounts of the victims and the killer, along with the investigators' scribbled notes. One member of the team said, quietly, "Looking at this scene, it's like we're preparing for a battle in a movie. Only it's a pity that this is real life, no CGI." The digital forensics experts began to present the results of their analysis of online data, including recovery messages, IP logs, fake social media accounts, and private groups the killer had joined. Each clue was numbered, coded, and linked to physical crime scenes the team had discovered on previous beaches. Looking at the analysis, one investigator sneered. If he studied programming, he must be a genius, but he must also be a genius controlled by the devil. But the smiles quickly faded when the investigators looked at a recovery chat. In it, the killer demonstrated his sophistication in manipulating the victim's emotions, each sentence and word calculated to create false trust, isolate the victim, and lead them into a trap. One forensics officer muttered, "It's a wonder you don't get goosebumps reading this. He doesn't just kill people, he also kills the spirit first." The investigation team decided that now was the time for a face-to-face confrontation. They had determined the killer's location with near certainty, based on IP data, security camera footage, and the victim's relationship with online chats. This meeting was not only to make an arrest, but also to take statements, observe reactions, and collect more psychological evidence, preparing for the future trial. Before entering the scene, the investigation team held a strategy briefing, sharing every important detail and assigning tasks. One investigator joked, "Remember, if he laughs evilly, don't panic. If he laughs, we can laugh too, but don't forget the guns and evidence." This statement made the whole room tense and laugh lightly, as a mechanism to relieve mental pressure before the upcoming climax. The confrontation took place in the murderer's rented apartment, monitored from the outside by cameras and recording devices. The investigation team was divided into two groups. One group kept the murderer under control. The other group collected online data and physical evidence to compare with the testimony. The murderer appeared, an ordinary man with nothing special in appearance, but his cold eyes and crooked smile made the investigators shiver. Looking at him, a member muttered, "Just an ordinary person, but this kind of ordinary, well, luckily we have a plan." The confrontation began. The lead investigator said, "We have all the data on the victims, the messages, the IP, and even the fake social media accounts you created. Do you want to explain?" The killer sneered, his eyes flashing with terrifying confidence. "Explain? I just talked to them. What happened after that? It's not up to me to decide." Another investigator couldn't keep his cool, his voice serious. "Do you think we don't know that you've been tracking their every move, every online story, every emotion they shared? Do you think you can hide it from us with a few fake accounts?" The killer was silent, his eyes quickly scanning each person, seemingly calculating. A member of the investigation team noted, "This silence is important because it shows the psychology of the criminal when weighed down by evidence." Next, the investigator opened a screen, showing the chat messages the killer had sent to the victims, each image he had followed, each meeting place he had set up. The surviving victims were invited to confirm the details, and each reaction, each glance, each trembling voice was recorded, filmed, and analyzed by the investigation team. Seeing this scene, the killer began to show the first signs of insecurity. His eyes scanned the evidence, his breathing was rapid, his hands were clenched. An investigator joked, "Oh, look at his face, it turns out he is also afraid, just afraid that we will find out." The victims recounted each experience, each message, each time he manipulated them online. One girl trembled and said, "I thought I was chatting with a normal person, but it turned out to be the most sophisticated trap." The confrontation gradually accelerated. Investigators presented physical evidence, from the beach scene to the items he left behind, combined with online data and stalking behavior, forcing him to admit to each action, each victim. A tense but also funny scene occurred when the killer tried to explain some of his irrational behavior. He said that some chats were just online jokes. An investigator sneered, "Joke? If this kind of joke really killed people, then it was really a big deal." Gradually, under the pressure of mounting evidence, he began to confess to some incidents, but still tried to deny his guilt in a sophisticated way in other details. Forensic experts analyzed every word, compared it with online data, and discovered that some of the details he stated did not match the truth, thereby opening up the opportunity to capture all the final evidence. During the cross-examination, the investigation team also discovered that the killer had a habit of monitoring online information about the police and the press, anticipating the steps of the investigation and adjusting his behavior to avoid detection. This is why he was able to survive for so long without being detected, an extremely sophisticated strategy that surprised and horrified experts. As the cross-examination neared its end, the investigator asked, "Do you regret it? Do you see what you did?" The killer smiled sarcastically, his eyes cold. "Regret it? I just did what I thought was right in my own way." The investigation team understood that the next step was to bring him to justice, but at the same time, they recorded an important victory. All the online data, physical scenes, and testimonies now formed a complete dossier, enough to bring to court and convince a jury. Chapter 3 closes with a climactic showdown, where the killer is finally confronted with the truth, the survivor. Welcome back to the next part of the investigation into the Long Island serial killer case. If Chapter 3 gave you goosebumps with its direct confrontation, then Chapter 4 will take you to the center of the trial, where every testimony, every piece of evidence, every look is a sophisticated weapon, and where justice tests the patience of all of us. From early morning, the trial attracted the attention of the press, television, and of course, hundreds of spectators interested in the case. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with tension, mixed with curious whispers and even half-smiles when some details of the murderer's irrational behavior were recalled. One reporter exclaimed, "If it weren't real life, I would think this was a horror movie script mixed with humor, because he was normal, but his actions were too abnormal. The judge banged his gavel and signaled to begin. He looked around, his eyes cold, but he didn't seem to have the same confidence as in the apartment where he had been confronted. The investigators, the surviving victims, the prosecuting attorney, and the defense attorney were all present. The cameras and recording equipment were running nonstop. One investigator joked, "There's no turning back now, my friend. Don't forget to wear your suit, because today is the day you have to testify for the crime you committed." The trial opened with the prosecution's presentation of evidence, a system of data collected from the crime scene, online data, and testimony in Chapter 3. The prosecutor led the way from the online messages the defendant sent, the fake accounts he created, to every physical clue at the beach where the victims were found. We can prove that the defendant's actions were systematic, deliberate, and sophisticated. Images, maps, chats, and physical evidence were shown on a large screen, making the audience both startled and sigh. A small but impressive detail. In the chat, the killer had texted the victim using seemingly harmless emoticons, but they were actually signs of emotional manipulation and behavioral control. A forensic psychologist explained, "It's a sophisticated form. Emoticons seem simple but create false trust, isolate the victim, and gradually lead them into a trap." The defense attorney immediately objected, saying, "Emoticons don't prove a crime. Direct behavior is the problem." But the prosecutor smiled, pointing to the cross-reference data from the scene and social media. "That's why we combined all the data, messages, IPs, victim schedules, and physical evidence of the scene." The defendant had no way to deny it. A surviving victim was invited to testify to the court about his experience. "I thought I was talking to a normal person," she recounted, "but it turned out that he calculated every word, every image, every appointment to control me." Her voice was shaky but strong. Her eyes darted to the killer, who tried to remain expressionless. "That look, cold and empty, just like a villain in a horror movie," one viewer mumbled. The prosecutor continued, presenting a detailed online investigation file, proving that his online behavior was not random, but a series of deliberate actions, targeting vulnerable women, often sex workers or women living alone, who he thought no one cared about. During the trial, forensic psychologists were called in to analyze the killer's behavior. They explained in detail how he monitored and controlled his victims' emotions, and why he was able to maintain his crimes for so long without being detected. One expert did not forget to add a humorous comment. If he had another job, he would definitely be a social media expert, but unfortunately, he chose the profession of murder. The statement made the entire courtroom tense and burst into laughter, reducing the mental pressure. The real climax began when the murderer was summoned to the court to answer questions directly. The prosecutor asked, "You followed the victims with fake accounts. You knew that this action would endanger them. Why did you still do it?" He was silent, his eyes scanned each person, then slowly, "I didn't think it would be like that." His voice trembled, but he tried to appear calm. An investigator noted, this was the first moment of weakness. His eyes were no longer as sharp as before. Next came the event that silenced the entire courtroom. The prosecutor showed a video from a surveillance camera near the scene, recording the image of him moving, carrying the victim's belongings. The victims clearly identified him. The killer cowered, his eyes flashing with worry. One audience member whispered, "Oh." In the end, social media didn't save him, because real cameras are always more honest than fake accounts. The defense attorney tried to maneuver, arguing that the killer just made a mistake, but the prosecutor quickly refuted with a series of online data evidence, the physical scene, testimony during cross-examination in Chapter 3, and the close connection between the victims and the defendant's actions. During the trial, an extremely important detail was revealed. The victims tried to contact each other, but he controlled them with fake accounts. A forensic expert explained, he not only killed people physically, but also killed their ability to protect themselves, isolating them from the outside world. An audience member muttered, "It's chilling to hear, but also a bit funny to the point of horror. Imagine him going online like planning a super cruel chess game." When the prosecutor finished his evidence, it was the defense's turn to argue. They tried to exploit the psychological factor. The killer grew up in a stressful environment, had experienced trauma, and showed signs of a personality disorder. But the prosecutor stressed, regardless of the reason, the defendant's actions were deliberate, systematic, and dangerous to the lives of many people, and cannot be ignored. The trial entered a decisive phase. The victims continued to testify, proving each action, each connection, each online trick. The killer was almost isolated. Every word, every gesture was monitored. His eyes began to flash with real fear. An investigator joked, if he knew he was going to be convicted, he would surely wish he had an undue account in real life. After many tense hours, the preliminary verdict was given. Based on online evidence, physical scenes, cross-examination testimony, and psychological analysis, the court confirmed that the defendant's actions were not just individual acts but systematic crimes, paving the way for the final sentence. At this moment, the prosecutor did not forget to emphasize the message to the audience, which is also a natural CTA/CTR. If you think a fake account is harmless, think again. Online evidence has helped us bring the perpetrator to light. And this story is not over yet. There are many final knots that will be solved in the next part. Where will justice really be served? Please watch part 5. Will justice be served? To witness the final step of the case. The trial ended, but the audience still sat, discussing the behavior, psychology, and online tricks of the murderer. Some whispered, "Thank goodness online technologies have now become a tool for prosecuting criminals. Otherwise, he might have been hidden for longer." Chapter 4 closed with the climax of the trial, where justice was at the threshold. All the evidence, testimony, and psychological analysis were brought to light. But the final question remains. Will the final verdict bring just and fitting punishment to the victims? The answer will be answered in Chapter 5, where all the knots are untied, all the mysteries are revealed, and will justice truly be served? And then, after months of tension, the night on Long Island was no longer a veil of darkness, but a battle between light and darkness, between justice and fear, between unsolved mysteries and the last clues. The police and the FBI have been tracking the suspect since all the evidence began to point directly to the small house lying peacefully on an ordinary street, where any neighbor passing by would think this was just a quiet place, a family like any other, but in fact, right inside, dark secrets were hidden, waiting to be unearthed. From early morning, the investigation team gathered at the FBI headquarters. The screen was filled with diagrams, data, images of the scene, and the suspect's phone recordings, every detail analyzed down to the second, because no one wanted to miss a single sign, because who knows, just a small moment could lead to solving the case. Even irregular security cameras were reviewed over and over again, frame by frame, movement by movement, because in that silence, the smallest actions of the suspect could reveal a whole creepy story. And while the technical experts analyzed the network data, searched for the suspect's online connections, the field team prepared all the necessary equipment for the break-in, from cameras, forensic cameras, to evidence bags. Everything was carefully prepared, as if they were preparing for a military mission, because in reality, in everyone's mind, this was not just a murder case. This was a battle with a man who had spread terror for years. As night fell, the light from the street lamps illuminated the empty streets. The FBI coordinated with the local police to enter the suspect's house. The space was so quiet that you could hear the light footsteps of the detective squad. Every action, every gesture is observed, recorded. Everything is potential evidence. The suspect, unbeknownst to him, is in the house, and the tension is at its peak, as if the house itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. When the door opens, light from outside seeps into the dark corners, reflecting off ordinary, but now suspicious objects. Open computers, scattered boxes of documents on the desk, seal bags, all are handled with care. The forensic team moves from room to room, taking pictures, collecting samples, everything done with a false calm, knowing that even the slightest mistake could ruin the case. And then, in a locked room, the officers find items directly related to the victim. Personal belongings, carefully hidden documents, traces of DNA. Everything tells a truth that the suspect cannot deny. The tension grew as the suspect was led out, standing between two lines of police and FBI, his eyes cold but somewhat fearful of the evidence around him. The confrontation was a psychological battle. Each question was asked, each piece of evidence was presented. The suspect initially denied the crime, but each statement, each clue, each piece of electronic data, and his online diary, all were pressed so hard that there was no room for evasion. The FBI, in a tone that was both stern and patient, emphasized the details of the victims, his online connections, and how his actions were recorded, monitored, and connected to previous cases. The suspect began to falter, the lies became tangled, and the truth gradually emerged. The climax of the case comes when the FBI releases the entire chain of evidence from the suspect's online conversations with the victims, the locations he frequented, the items he hid, and the sophisticated but cruel interactions he had. With no way out, the suspect is forced to admit his actions, details about each victim, each event, each manipulation. Each confession is a piece that completes the horrifying picture that the entire community has lived in fear of for years. All the unanswered questions from the previous parts are now explained. Why the victims were chosen, why the evidence was hidden, why it took the FBI and police so long to find the trail. It all makes sense, but it still makes the listener shudder. The details of the case are revealed step by step, with the narrator interspersing light but humorous comments to ease the tension. For example, it turns out the suspect is also the kind of neighbor you'll ask to borrow salt next week. What a shock. Or if the FBI had been just one day later, we would never have known the truth, and the suspect would still be sipping coffee on the porch. These humorous moments help viewers breathe a sigh of relief and continue to stay glued to the screen, because they know that the story is not over yet, and the final secret is still waiting. After the suspect is subdued, the entire scene is sealed off, the evidence is transferred to the forensic room, and the FBI holds an internal press conference to explain the entire chain of events. The details are still unknown to the public, but the investigative team understands that this is a major turning point. The person who sowed fear right next to everyone has been revealed, and the Long Island community begins to breathe a sigh of relief. But at the same time, many questions remain. Will justice be fully served? Will the trauma suffered by the victims and their families be compensated? And will the sophisticated methods used by the suspect force investigative agencies to change their approach in the future? As the story reaches its climax, the narrator emphasizes that the Long Island serial killer case is not just a story about crime, but also a story about perseverance, a combination of technology, criminal psychology, and human intuition. This combination allows the FBI and local police to gradually unravel the layers of secrecy that the suspect has built up over the years. The narrator ends the chapter with a provocative call, and although the suspect has been identified, the story is not over. The mysteries of justice, of uncompensated victims, and of sophisticated online behavior are still waiting to be discovered. If you want to know the final pieces, the hidden corners that have not been revealed, follow Part 5. Long Island Serial Killer. Will justice be served? To witness the legal outcome and see if justice is truly served. But before we enter that conclusion, take a moment to remember other cases that have shaken the community, stories where the light of justice must shine in every corner of the crime, such as the West Memphis Three boys found dead case, where 3 boys were found leaving unsolved traces, and will be the subject of the next installment in this dramatic true crime series. And so, this final chapter not only solves the entire mystery, but also leads to the West Memphis Three boys found dead, Part 1 case, keeping the viewer's suspense and curiosity at its peak. The viewer is both satisfied with the final answer of the Long Island serial killer and urged to click on the next video to explore another haunting and thrilling case.